Hey Grinderschool, welcome back. This is CodeRed Rules, and this is week 2 of the Grinderschool Cash Game Series, where today we're playing 5NL 6 Max. I've selected around 50 hands or so that we're going to be doing for videos, and today I have right here just the first 9. These were on a table that I originally sat on, but I really couldn't 9 tables 6 Max, so I dropped this one, but you guys kept it up, and so these are the hands that I'm doing from this table, and from after I do these hands, we'll go back to the ones we're on all the other tables combined. But I had a problem with these in the converter for some reason, so I do them separately. But anyway, in this hand, this is actually, I think, one of the first hands of the session with Colossus and Genesu sitting there. It's heads up right now between Zane and myself. And he just barreled all the way down in position, and I check-called him 3 streets. The only thing I wanted to bring up about this hand is that it's okay, Zane, to raise pre-flop here. It's okay to continuation bet. But on the turn and river, you have no equity, and the turn and river, you should not be really firing this many streets, given the fact that you've got really no equity. There's not really any scare cards, so the board hasn't changed, and otherwise you're just kind of like just betting and betting and betting, and with no real chance of winning the hand. So what I would do is I would see what the flop and then just give up on the turn like you would any normal hand. But that one aside, all right, now let's go on to 6 Max, and so far, let's see here. Zane makes the re-raise of ace-9 offsuit. Now this is a pretty decent hand to be re-raising as a bluff with, and one thing I don't like, though, is the re-raise size. I think we gotta make this around 60 cents, and then we'll be okay. We're not trying to have Colossus make the call, that's for sure. So, on this ace-high board, in a re-raise pot out of position, this is kind of the problems with, re-raising these marginal ace-high hands. Now, they're good for polarizing your hand range and whatnot. But when you're expecting your opponents to call you with a decent high frequency, bluffing them becomes particularly difficult because of situations like this. The only reasons now to keep betting is for value at this point. All right, our opponent is not going to be folding ace-10, ace-jack, ace-queen, or ace-king. That's for sure. He probably has all of those hands in his hand range. So he's probably not going to be folding those hands. He probably doesn't have ace-2 through ace-8 as often as hand range, if at all. What he will be calling us with will be queens and kings. Probably not with 10s and 9s, although you might be able to put them in his hand range. And maybe a flush draw, maybe a jack, if he has a jack in his hand range. So he's going to be calling us with pretty much any middle pair or higher and any draw of any kind. That said, how much equity do we really have on this board right now? Well, let's go ahead and run this guy through Poker Stove. And if you guys don't use Poker Stove a lot, I mean, this is a really good example of a reason why you should be using it. Oops, sorry. Ace of Hearts, 9 of Diamonds. We're going to give Colossus a range of, let's say, any pair, any Broadway. Okay? And starting from there, he's not going to be following with these offsuit stuff all that much. Probably folding. I can see him calling with a lot of these hands just because I know Colossus. Alright, he's also going to be calling our flop bet with, let's just say, 8s and better, just for fun's sake, as well as pocket 2s. Alright, so let's go ahead and give him that hand range right now, just to start. This is going to be the hand range that's going to be calling our flop bet. So this includes not only the hand range that calls pre-flop the re-raise, but also the hands that can be calling a flop c-bet. And I'm doing this to determine how much equity we have when we're called when we bet out. Otherwise known as, can we really value bet here? And as you can see, we have some value in this situation. So we are ahead. Alright, so that means we can go ahead and value bet here just fine. Alright, what about this turn right now? Well, this turn card is pretty nasty. Against the same hand range, our equity now goes from 55 down to 37% against the same hand range. That one card has totally ruined everything for us. He's no longer going to be calling 8s and 9s. He might still have queen 10 if we bet again. I doubt it, though. I'm sure he's going to be folding queen 10, king 10. and he'll probably be folding king jack and queen jack as well. Okay, so his hand range for continuing post flop here is even more dire than we originally thought. It's probably going to be around 17% if we bet. All right, that makes this value bet right here too thin. And you're right to realize that when he raises you on this turn, yeah, you're going to be smoked. Okay, but here's the problem with the entire way this hand was played. Sorry, starting with the flop here, this is where we should have checked, knowing full well that on the turn, if Colossus calls on the flop, we're not going to be too comfortable with our equity on the turn when the next card comes in. And at this point, it's best to represent a very weak hand. And let's just say we can represent a hand like pocket kings or pocket queens here. And this is a good way to balance out that hand range when we do have kings or queens and check call on ace high board. That way, our opponent can always put us on kings or queens when we check on the ace high board. So I would check call the flop. And even though a value bet here is going to, we can bet here for a very small value, on the turn, most of the time, our range is going to be fairly strong to the point where, or his range is going to be fairly strong to the point where he no longer really has too many more. What's this? We can put from 10. We can put at 3 diamonds, on the board, and the hand range. I mean, our equity-wise against his hand range still doesn't really increase too much, right? To the point where we can value bet. We're not over 50%, so we're to the point where we need to induce a bluff and induce some bets. In a re-raised pot with top pair, it becomes pretty much incorrect to fold at any point in the hand, especially after you've put in, all right, 40% of your chip stack here, $2 out of $5. At this point, your opponent is going to be bluffing enough. The pot's already going to be very large. This pot's already got 100 big blinds in it. You're not really getting that poor of a price in order to make the call. Your opponent might be bluffing here. Go ahead and stack off and getting it in. Knowing full well that you plan on stacking off on this flop, you're better off to just go ahead and check and let Colossus bet 3 streets rather than try and value bet. If we had ace queen, it would still be, I think it would be okay to value bet the flop, but then we would still check this turn and check call it down. The difference between ace queen and ace 9 on this board isn't necessarily that high, just because the hand range doesn't really change all that much from our opponent. I can go ahead and show you. We probably still don't have... Oops, not king queen. I wanted ace queen. Even with ace queen on this turn, we still don't have enough equity to continue betting given our opponent's hand. What about ace king? So at this point, pretty much any ace that we have, unless we have 2 pair, we can't really continue betting. Okay, so here we go, Sir Mix-a-Lot. We got raising up, got a call. Checking on this board is fine. I think I've done a c-bet homework on this, on which board is better for us to continuation bet, this one or the one with the higher cards. I think ace queen's got enough value here that we can continuation bet as a bluff, or we can check call to induce as well and check call it down. The biggest problem that I see right here is Zane slow playing quads. And the reason why I don't like you slow playing is that because our opponent's going to have a flush some percentage of the amount of time. Not too often, but some percentage of the time. He's also going to have a boat some percentage of the time. And he's going to have the ace of spades, the flush draw, given the way that he's played so far. So, given all of that, why would we slow play the turn when we could very easily be betting again and let our opponent think that we're still bluffing from the flop? I would bet here pretty low, maybe like 65, 70 cents. Sir Mix-a-Lot's not going to be folding the hand that he has right now. He's got way too much outs that he thinks he does. And there's a lot of bad cards that can come for you, Zane, if he was planning on calling. Let's say if he doesn't have the ace of spades, let's say he has a hand like pocket sixes. If a 4th spade comes on the next street, we're not going to be getting all that much value. If the board pairs, all right, we might not be getting that much more value. If there's a lot of just tough cards that can come, but we don't really want to see a river card. And obviously betting the river pot is going to be just fine. and Sir Mix-a-Lot calls, hoping to split the pot. I don't think this is a very good call on the river for you, Married with Children, only because you're risking 87 cents to win 44. So you're not planning, and that's if you're even, going to be splitting the pot here. So I would be folding in this situation, or lead out ourselves, trying to get our opponent to fold, rather than inducing a bluff and trying to win half the pot here. All right, on the next hand. The first thing that I see with King Jack in this situation is you're turning it into a bluff in a situation where I believe it's going to be correct for us to call pre-flop. You are correct in assuming, though, that if you can't call with it, or if you feel like you can't call with it, then it's a good hand to be re-raising as a bluff. But I would call with it here, and if I'm Sean, I'm probably folding the ace-queen offsuit to a raise and a re-raise at this point. Oh, let's see. Sean, I think that's fine. Genius 2, I think I would rather have you c-bet this flop and just hope to take it down right now rather than giving up on your king high. Even though Sean did call a raise and a re-raise, his hand range is going to be like jacks, queens, kings, aces, ace, king, ace, queen. And against that hand range, you're going to have some fold equity out there with ace, king, and jacks folding that you're probably going to have enough fold equity on a bluff. Call once, street once as jacks hits, and then give up on the river. If I'm Sean, I would be probably still value betting again, only because it doesn't make any sense what Genius 2 would have, given that he re-raised pre-flop, checked the flop, called turn. There's not really anything that we should be that afraid of, unless other than like pocket jacks. I probably would bet again and go for some small value. All right, Genius 2, you could have raised up the 7-8 suited there. So far, this is pretty standard. The aces and the ace-king suited. Okay. Here's what I'd rather like to see you do in a 6-max game. Cut off first button, given that Sean is sitting out. Go ahead and make the 4-bet here, because it's going to be really hard for your opponent to fold a lot of his value hands that he's re-raising with to your 4-bets. If you make $1.20 here, ace-king has to call, or at least get it all in. Jacks, queens, kings, aces. A lot of his value range is not going to be folding to your 4-bet with aces, which is why you should almost always be 4-betting aces unless you're playing against a really super nit. And even then, you might as well, just because he's going to have a strong hand anyway. So I'd like to see you re-raise the aces here, only because there's so many bad cards that can come for your opponent on the flop that it's going to be really hard for you to get value. If your opponent has kings or queens, like, he's going to get it in with you now anyway. But if he has ace-king, right, you're hoping that he flops a king, because it's very hard for him to flop an ace when you have two of them in your hand. Here's an example of a board where it's not necessarily bad for you as much as it would be bad for your opponent, because you're the one calling. If anyone's going to hit this board, it's actually going to be you, Zane, not Nick's play, because Nick's play is going to have ace-king in his hand range, ace-queen in his hand range. You're going to have hands like 10s, 8s, and 5s in your own for calling the re-raise. I would much rather like to see you go ahead and check to the person who re-raised you rather than reversing the initiative here and having Nick's play be able to make a very easy fold, which he doesn't make. He goes all in here, which is another point of the hand. All right, we made a re-raise with ace-king suited. We have position. Our opponent leads into us. At this point, we don't really have that much equity. We've got like a backdoor draw and maybe 2 overcards. I would probably just go ahead and give up right now and go on to the next hand. Rather than trying to win every single pot you're in or every single time you put in a re-raise pre-flop, go ahead and fold it out. And Zane, you got kind of lucky, I guess, that he decided to spew off to you. All right, in this next hand, ace-10 suited, going to be raising it up. Zane, go ahead and fold pre-flop with the 5-3 suited. Not a very good call, given that we're only getting around 4-1 to make the call. We probably only going to be calling like 10-9 suited would be the worst suited connector that we would have here. And even then, it's a stretch. I would have liked, Sean, for you to be continuation betting this flop. Otherwise, I want to say this is a really good turn check raise by you, Zane. I really like it. I think you could have made it smaller and have been more effective, or as effective. Like if you made it $1.50 rather than $2.15. And with this raise size, you kind of like it's just very large. But I do really like the turn check raise with the open ends right flush draw, and you get Sir Mix-a-Lot to fold. He had King Queen here in the hand. All right, so on to this guy. We can't call with Ace-4 suited here, Sir Mix-a-Lot. Nick's plays open raising is just fine, but Ace-4 suited is just too weak of a hand to be calling out of position given our opponent's hand range. In fact, if you wanted to play this hand, it would be a perfect hand to be 3-betting as a bluff, just because we just can't call with it out of position for value and have it be correct, especially from the small blind. So I would be making this re-raise to around 65 cents, given there's antes in the pot, and it would be just fine. There's not really much your opponent can do with that re-raise here, and I re-raised a bunch of the times with the suited aces like this, just because you can't really call with them given the price, and it's an aggressive game, so you should be 3-betting them. Post flop, I feel like it was pretty standard. I'm not a fan of Nick's play continuation betting here. Think about this. What do you want to have happen in this hand? Like, are you wanting your opponent to fold right now, or are you wanting your opponent to call you with his hand range? If your opponent calls you, Ace-2 suited is most certainly behind. If your opponent folds, Ace-2 suited is certainly ahead. So you're getting value from the wrong hand range. And I would be checking back here with pretty much any pair and Ace-King. In fact, Ace-2 and Ace-King pretty much have the exact same value right now. Sir Mix-a-Lot makes a good check call. I like the lead here with the ace. I'm not so much a fan of the raising with the ace-deuce. And I'll tell you why. Because ace-deuce is probably the worst 2-pair on this board. You lose to ace-4, ace-10, pocket 2s, pocket 4s, pocket 10s, pocket aces. There's so many cards that you lose to this raise. There's not a whole lot many ace-x hands that call the flop and then will be, that when they ship in on you here, go all in, that ace-deuce is ahead of right now, given this play. Now, a lot of you guys are going to be thinking, wow, ace-4 versus ace-2, what a cooler. Well, ace-2 could have very easily gotten away with his hand pretty cheaply if he just called the turn, called the river, and then that would be pretty much a cooler and be much more a mistake on Sir Mix-a-Lot's part for calling preflop. It's actually a much bigger mistake Nick's play for you to be stacking off on this turn, even with your marginal 2-pair. Alright, on the next hand, good raise with Jack-10 suited. This call out of position with the Jack-10 suited is very, very marginal. If you had a good read on your opponent, and if you were very deep, you could have actually made this call and have it be much more profitable than, say, it is right now. It's actually a decent hand to be re-raising as a bluff if we feel like we can't call it. So I'd rather have you re-raise it over folding, but calling is okay. I'm not saying it's going to be the greatest play. Good flop check. Good turn bet, of course. Jack-10's turn raised, though, makes relatively little sense, because what hand are we representing here by raising the turn? Okay, we're representing a hand much stronger than the jack. And when we have the jack, and we're representing a hand stronger than that, we're turning our hand to a bluff, and we're only getting called by better hands. So there's not really a whole lot of value to be had by raising this turn, especially this large. I would be calling the turn here, expecting to be ahead with the Jack-10, but raising it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Now, when we get 3-bet on the turn, it's definitely a warning flag for us to go ahead and let it go, especially against a small 3-bet like this. It's very easy for us to fold. Nick's play, I don't like your 3-bet size. I think it needs to be just a little bit larger. As you'll see here on the next street, the pot is 350. We have 370 behind. We need to fix that gap there. Throw in another 20 cents here on your raise, and you'd be just fine. You'd have 350 and a 390 pot. And Zane, you actually did fold there, which is good on the river. I feel like though you would have gotten away with this hand a lot cheaper. You would have just called the 16 cents. The pot would have been 64. He would have bet 50 cents on the river. You would have gotten away with less than the amount of money that you put on this turn raise. Alright. Ace-8 offsuit, it's a decent hand to be raising. Ace-Queen offsuit, this deep, it's really up to you on how you want to play it. If you want to re-raise it for value, you can. If you want to just go ahead and play a small pot with it too in position, that's more than okay. Now, if I'm section here, this is a really great spot to squeeze. And Ace-4 suited, I just talked about how re-raising the suited aces are great. We really can't call out of position here. Just look at look who we're up against. We're up against two other aces that are really big. You're going to see this quite a bit, that we're not really getting that great of a price as we think we are, even though we're getting 4-1. We can pop this guy up to around 65, 70 cents, see that most flops, and win the hand almost outright a lot of the times. We flop the ace. I would like to have seen Zane continuation bet here, and I would like to see Sean, your bet being larger, being around 35 cents. Section's good check call. Not a very good barrel for you, Sean. A horrible card. This changes nothing in the hand. Your opponent's representing the jack by calling the flop. You're betting into him. You're not going to be getting that many hands to fold. Oh, you might be getting hands like 6s through 9s, 10s to fold. So I mean, you might have some fold equity here. I'm not sure if he's going to be folding those hands, but you're representing too narrow of a hand range. That if it were a queen or a king come, or obviously definitely a king, or even a 10, where you're going to have more equity with your bluff, that'd be just fine. All right. Two things here on the river section. I like you leading out here, and it's not really a blocking bet as much as it is you're preventing your opponent from checking behind. I like to see your bet be larger, like $1.50. You're going to get a lot of value from Sean that way. Sean, I don't know why you're calling this river bet, because your opponent could have had 0 draws, getting to the river, getting me checked, that he check called twice, and now he's betting on the river. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. That it makes a very easy fold for us. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put you guys on pause. I'll be right back with the rest of the hands. And we're back. Now, I actually think this might go into 2 parts. And if that's the case, I'll go for about another 25-30 minutes on this, and then I'll go ahead and make another video. And I'll probably release that either tomorrow or Monday. So, alright, let's go ahead and get started here. I'm trying to do it quick to get through a lot of hands, because there's a lot of hands. We played a lot of hands. We probably played the most hands we've ever played in a Grinderschool Cash Series. We played a lot of tables. There's a lot of things to go over, but I mean, that was actually really good. But okay, let's go on. Zane, go ahead, pops up Ace-Queen suited. Sir Mix-a-Lot makes the call just fine all the way around. Zane, you could very easily be continuation betting here. It is a rather wet board, and your opponent's going to be calling you quite a bit, but you've got a lot of 2-barreling opportunities in this situation, which is what I like to see. You can barrel any diamond on the turn, you can barrel any 10, any king on the turn, as well as having a queen or an ace. So we pretty much have 33% barreling all written all over this on this board. Sir Mix-a-Lot, I'm not a big fan of your bet. And even though Zane did call you with... No, we're going to want to talk about here. So I'm not a big fan of this bet because not a lot of worse hands going to call you. I agree with you if you feel like you're ahead right now. Okay, I feel like you're ahead right now too, because if you weren't ahead, he probably wouldn't be checking. All right. So what I would do is check behind here, pot control it, try and induce a bluff from your opponent on the turn on river. That's pretty much there's going to be a standard line. You're going to be taking that line a lot in your career as a poker player. This hand is pretty much not an exception to that. Zane, okay, you check raised him. It's kind of a strange check raise. I like to see you make it a little larger. It doesn't really make any sense to me, though, what you're trying to represent and what you're doing. Because if you had a very strong hand, you would be betting and betting and betting and going 3 streets without really any kind of a read that you're going to have on your opponent. I think there was a thread on Grinderschool about check raising the flop now instead of continuation betting. I've never really understood why people would do that rather than c-betting. It doesn't really change much of anything. It's kind of like a fancy play syndrome. It's not really a part of my game. I don't recommend it being a part of yours either. The exception would be if you were short stacked and you had like some kind of crazy draw, like open and straight flush draw, If that's the case, that's probably like the only, or maybe 12 out draw or better. I probably would do that against a short stack. At some point, maybe I might even just like bet 2 streets too and get it in and have it be just as profitable against a short stack. So I mean, that's probably much the only time I would see that. Not too big of a fan with it otherwise. At this point, 10's bet calling. He's gonna be calling this turn. I'm not sure if I like the 10's calling the flop, but you know what I mean? He had a good read on Zane that Zane was bluffing at this point, but I would rather just see you check behind Sir Mix-a-Lot and avoid having to deal with a check raise and stuff, making your hand play much more difficult. All right. I have the jacks, and Dakaberry, you want how to make a re-raise here. Keep in mind, all right, your re-raise size is way, way too small, given we're 200 big blinds deep. Okay? You're re-raising under the gun razor. You should be, and you're over 200 big blinds deep, 3-way. You gotta be raising this way up there, probably like 75, 80 cents. Trying not to give odds to those who have pocket pairs like me, who are going to be calling. Alright, this other guy in here was also a pretty big donk. And he really complicated the way that I saw things too. This is such a strange line for you, Shamble Suitor, by checking this flop. You did underplay your hand. That's for sure. And to the point where I actually thought I was ahead, which is why I'm value betting against the fish in this situation here. Who I don't know, we have no reason why he's calling. But once you call Shamble Suitor, I was just kind of like, what in the world is going on here? Like, does he have like queens, kings, or aces, or does he have a hand like 10s? And the thing is, I really couldn't stop betting. I don't know if I really like this bet size all that much, given the way the hand played out. I'm just trying to get some value from the fish because I know the fish doesn't really have, I know he's really bad, and I'm just trying to like be very careful with the way Shamble Suitor has played his hand, and I give up on the river here. I'm not overcalling for sure, but I'm a little confused as well with the flop, with just check calling it down 3-way. What I would rather have you do is just bet out the flop. Okay, bet out like $1.05, maybe 95 or whatever. See who calls you. It's going to be a lot easier for you to play the hand. And if you bet out the turn again, and I raise you all in, then, or this other guy raises you all in, then it's probably going to be a fold on your part. I'm not going to be raising you all in 200 big blinds deep without really a strong hand. But this was one of the really difficult situations to be in, and luckily I got out on the river without having to pay off even more. I'm not liking my turn bet though. But I wasn't wanting to. The reason why I bet this much was because I didn't want to stack off on the turn. I was just trying to get some value, and also trying to get some information. Like, I know I was getting value from the donk, and if he were to fold, and it was me versus you heads up, I would check the river. If you were to fold and the donk played in it, I'd go for another value bet on the river. But such a strange way of playing. Okay, let's go on. All right, Peter, you make a call against this donk too. I forget what stats he had. You know what I mean? This could very well be a re-raise with the jacks here to isolate heads up. And here is the point of the hand, okay? We didn't re-raise pre-flop for some unknown reason, okay? I don't know why you didn't re-raise pre-flop, but if you felt like you have enough value on this flop to make a raise with an overpair, then you should most certainly be re-raising pre-flop for value too. And I say that only because his hand range only improves and your equity only goes down against the same calling range, okay? Pre-flop, he's going to be calling you, like, you re-raise with, like, ace-jack maybe, ace-queen, ace-king, like, alright, missed overcards. He might also call you with pairs and stuff like that. On this flop, though, he's only going to call you with pairs and over pairs. He's not going to be calling you anymore with ace king or ace queen. So your equity, though, goes down on this compared to where you were pre-flop in a re-raised pot. You're right, though, that you're ahead on this flop against this guy. But why not re-raise pre-flop and just build a big pot up that way? All right. And then the next thing I wanted to bring up was your river check. We felt like we had enough value to bet the flop, to raise the flop, bet the turn. The river doesn't change a whole lot. All right. We can't be afraid of losing the rest of our stack given how big the pot is. Okay? We have $3 behind. And a lot of the times you guys are worried about losing the money in the pot. For some reason, the money in the pot's already in the pot. So when you're like, oh man, I don't want to lose that $7 or whatever, that's not what you should be thinking about when you're going to make a bet. You need to be thinking about, can I make enough money on my river bet with the jacks with my $3 river bet? Not the money's in the pot. Because if you check behind here and you lose, you're going to lose the money in the pot anyway. It's just about, do you have enough value with a river bet? And I'm not saying against an unknown, all right, again, on this board, it's not that great for jacks. That is true. But I wouldn't be afraid to value bet. I feel like if he hit 2 pair, he would be jamming in the river. And if you think of it as a very as a condensed thought process here, you've got an overpair, to your opponent who's a fish. Go ahead and get stacks in at that point. If you had pocket aces, would you get stacks in on this river with pocket aces? At that point, you're just kind of arguing, how often does he have queens, kings, or aces? And if you feel like he's got that often, then maybe we shouldn't have raised the flop. So there's just kind of incongruency there with that hand. It is an interesting hand, given like we didn't re-raise pre-flop when we could have, and if we had a read on him that he was as big of a fish, then we definitely should have. All right, looks like we already went over this hand. That's good. All right, Zane, we already went over that hand as 2. All right, that's fine. Sometimes I'm not sure. All right, we went over that one. And that one. So it looks like the 9 hands that I wanted to go over earlier did not work out that way. That's okay. This means that there's only less hands for me to review, which is a good thing. And, okay, I think this is where we're at. So King 9 raises the button. Ace Jack with Pirate Toast. He makes a re-raise. This could be done... This is probably done for value, a very thin value. I don't like the re-raise size. I'd like to see us re-raise to 60 cents or so, 4x out of position. And Ace-Jack offsuit is very, very thin. Like, you've got to have a read on your opponent that you can make this re-raise for value. I'm not sure if Zane is the right kind of guy to be re-raising Ace-Jack, although you can certainly argue some merit to it just because Zane did, in fact, call with King 9 offsuit. So I guess the ends justify the means at that point. And Zane, I wanted to say, calling the re-raise with King 9 offsuit is not a good play. I would like to see you just go ahead and fold it pre-flop, no problem, or 4-bet it. If you wanted to 4-bet to $1, I would not have any problem with that, given his small re-raise size. When check 2 on this flop, you've got to think about a couple of reasons why is he checking this flop. Is he checking this flop to fold, or is he checking this flop to induce a better in pot control? Right? If you ever know how Pirate Toast plays, he never folds to a flop bet. I mean, very rarely, if ever, folds to a flop bet. So I probably wouldn't bluff here at all against him. And in fact, this would be a good turn to continue betting, given that we now have outs. Had we not bet the flop, how I normally have the the draws lined up, if we had, like in my recent draw lecture, I would be checking here as well majority of the time, hoping to hit a free river card. I'd hate to see king high checking it down, given I know my opponent's going to have ace high a large frequency of time. But I think we could have just saved a lot of money by just folding pre. Alright, so calling fours here out of position is standard. What isn't standard, though, is your flop check raise. Okay? The amount of equity that a bluff has, amount of EV that a bluff has, is solely dependent on how much equity we have in the hand when we're called. We have 2 outs when we're called. That's not nearly enough in order to make a bluff. And we've got nothing to continue on the next street. We pretty much are solely basing our reads on the fact that our opponent has air right now, and he's going to be folding all that air. Well, if he has air, then we might as well just call him and see the next turn card. And aces played his hand just fine, and fours, you got what you deserve. You're bluffing with 2 outs. You're bluffing with exactly 2 outs, and there's really not any reason for you to be doing it. And it'd be a very easy way for you to just go ahead and save a stack. I mean, your whole reason why we called pre-flop was for the implied odds for when we flop a set of 4s, okay? Not to bluff our opponent off whatever hand that he has. You're playing your hand like you have pocket 3s here on the set. Well, the reason why we're playing the set, though, is to get value from him when he has his aces, not to bluff him when we miss. So definitely not a good play for you. The 7s and the king-jack suited calls are both very standard. The 7s calling this flop is a little marginal, but it's okay. The king-jack is definitely going to be calling. Once we reach the turn, though, we got to give some credence to what Pyrotos has in his hand range. He's the person we're pretty much afraid of right now. Not the guy who originally raised preflop, because the guy who raised preflop, if he had a hand, he'd keep betting. Okay, so right now it's going to be pocket 7s against Pyrotos' hand range for overcalling the flop. Well, what is Pyrotos overcalling the flop with? Well, he's going to have a king, he's going to have maybe 6-7 suited, and maybe a pair between, he's going to have 4s and 5s, and other pairs between 6s and queens, I guess, too, that he didn't re-raise pre-flop. We're not going to be getting any value, though, from him in here if he has ace high. And that's the point. All right, we're bluffing your hand with pocket 7s. If we were on the flop, I would bet the flop, but we can't really bet the turn here. And I certainly don't like the river call with the 7s. And Pyrotos is doing this little dinky little value bet here. What can I get value from with this little bet? And you totally paid him off because there's not really any hand he could ever have calling 2 streets with the draw with a 6 coming in right now that he's betting for value with on this river that you're actually going to be ahead of, that you can make this call with. So if I were you, Zane, I would be checking this turn. If he checks behind and we checked him again on the river and he bets the river, we could call then at that point. But right now, just go ahead and fold it. One thing you got to do is try to realize when your opponents are value counting you and then play accordingly. If you think he's value counting you on the river, then don't make the call with a marginal hand, even though you feel like you're getting good odds. Alright, so we've got queen 5 suited and raising up on the button. I think that's a perfectly normal play. We don't really know what, Spy Q, we don't really have any read on him. We flop a very good hand. We flop bottom pair with the flush draw, and there are 2 different lines of thought on this. We can bet right now and build a pot. We've got a lot of equity. We've got a lot of outs. In fact, even against 10-8, we've got a lot of outs right now. Because mainly his cards don't counterfeit our draw at all. So even if you were to show his hand face up, we're doing fine. We could also check it behind here, take a free card, go from there. But I actually like Sean's play because when we do win, we're going to win a pretty large pot. So we're betting here on the flop. We get check raised. Our opponent's hand range must automatically be narrowed to a hand range of better draws than ours, combo draws, or sets. of which we don't really want to be getting it all in a flop with. So the min 3-bet is just kind of spew at this point. I would just call and see the turn card rather than min 3-betting and then stacking off over 100 big blinds deep with our pair and flush draw. Granted, our equity here on this flop is not too bad, right? But our implied odds are just as good against somebody who is planning on stacking off even on this flop against us. Alright, so yeah, we're coin flipping. We are on the opposite end where we have 48% equity here on this flop. Is that something that you want to risk $6 on? We're gonna win $6 half the time, lose $6 the other half. There's not really any value in there. Now, if he were to like check raise us all in, yeah, then we'd have to make the call, right? But given that he gives us the option to not stack off here, for us stacking off is not the number one option. Is not the number one play that we want to make, and we don't hit our draw. Yeah, you're unlucky that you missed that you didn't want a coin flip, but it was a coin flip that you didn't have to take, and all you're doing is increasing your variance. Next hand here, pop it up. Zane, I don't really mind your call all that much in position, so that's okay. In a normal game, though, against an unknown opponent, I'd like to see you fold, but I think 9-8 suited is just fine right now. I think this is the second time that we've seen you raise top pair no kicker on the flop. And it's the same theory is going to apply here, where you're representing a much stronger hand than the hand that you have, and you're bluffing in a sense. So you have top pair and you've got a strong, you've got a gut shot draw. But what's calling your big ass raise here? You raised him up 5 times his bet size. He's calling you with like better 9s, 5s, 7s, and the straight. I mean, there's just not a whole lot of value there to be had. And then you're forced to fold a river here. What you could have very easily have done on the flop, call the flop bet. You have another $1.30 you could have called here. Calling the flop, the pot would have been $1.20. He would have bet the turn. I mean another $1. It would have been just fine for you to call again. Maybe you hit your 2-pair draw. Maybe you don't. Your goal when you flop top pair, marginal kicker, or really just top pair, pretty much of anything, is to see a showdown, to maximize your value, not to, win the pot on the flop, and not to really, win stacks every single time. It's to win the majority of pots by also getting the maximum amount of value you can, and trying to raise your opponent off of whatever value hand that he has is not going to be the best way for you to be playing. Alright, so we don't really have a read on what Spike has in his hand range, but my 8's call and the 3's call is super standard pre-flop. In this situation, you are just really unlucky, but you've also got to realize that you've got bottom set and we're 220 big blinds deep. Okay? With that in mind, bottom set 220 big blinds deep is a strong hand. Okay? But is it stronger than my own hand range for stacking off on this board? Right? So you've got to keep that in mind. Given that you have a bet and a raise in front of you, and by the way, my raise size here is mammoth, like 5 times his raise size. I did that on purpose. One, because we're 200 big blinds deep, and we need to get the money in. You can even argue that my 8 is a coin flip against your own hand range, Wiki, because your hand range for stacking off on this board too is probably also 10s, 3s, and 8s. And so 8s is in between there, 3s is on the bottom of there. And so once you call the raise and the re-raise, I'm putting you on a hand range of 10s and 3s, maybe 10-8, maybe some kind of strong combo draw like Queen Jack of Diamonds, something like that. It's a very narrow hand range, and there's not really a whole lot you could do on the flop right now, other than check calling the raise and re-raise. When I bet full pot on this turn, you've got to be really hesitant on what kind of hand you're putting me on. Right now, you're just thinking about maybe, I flopped a set, getting stacks in. Okay? That's fine, 100 big blinds deep. 200 big blinds deep, bottom set becomes not that great of a hand. When you're only going to be stacking off with against players whose hand range is going to be stronger than your own. So, I think you check raised me here on the turn. And at that point, I knew you had, 10s or 3s. And I'm going to be calling because I'm a coin flip against that hand range. And it would not be a correct call for me if you never did this with 3s. Think about that. If you only ever check call with 3s because you were afraid of having up against 10s and 8s, when you did check raise here, I would have to fold a crazy amount of time just because of how deep we are, and that's really sick. But I mean, otherwise, yeah, you got coolered pretty bad going on that board. But learning how to play 200 big blinds deep is definitely a skill, and realizing your own stacking off range and what your opponent's stacking off range is, get to different stack sizes, I guess is one of the things you have to master. Just because, someone with 20 big blinds isn't stacking off with the same range against somebody with 100 big blinds. The money does matter there. One stack size is not equal to another, and I think that's why a lot of players like playing in the deep games, is because some people treat 200 big blinds the same as they treat 100, and that's not the case at all. Okay, so I'm going to be doing this hand here before we take a break. Make an end video 1. We'll go on to video 2 here to cover the rest of the hands. So far, me Zane raising up Queen Jack offsuit standard, Wiki calling ace unsuited also standard. This continuation with the Queen is good. I don't like the flop check raise with the ace high flush draw situation. I feel like we've got too much value here, and most of the time what's going to happen, alright, our opponent's going to be bluffing a lot when he does c-bet. The ace 10 of hearts would have been just fine all by itself. Now, if you haven't yet seen my Poker 201 video on how to play draws, in there's a perfect example of what not to do in this situation. Not really an example, but I detailed what you should be doing with the ace high flush draw you're out of position, and that's going to be check calling. Check calling the flop. Your equity, yeah, you do have the ace and the 9 hearts, so you've got 12 outs, but that's still not a favorite in the hand, right? That's you are an underdog, even though you are a slight underdog at that. So, and it's nice to take down the hand as a bluff too, but think about all the hands that you could potentially have here in your hand range that would be better to check raise bluff, given that you have the exact same fold equity no matter what hand that you re-raise here. Keep that in mind. So, whether you check raise pocket fours, ace 10 of hearts, or king jack of clubs, you have the same fold equity, or fold percentage rather, regardless of what you have, because your opponent's hand range is going to remain the same. So, of those 3 hands, okay, one hand we should be check raising, one hand we should be check calling, and one hand we should be check folding. All right, pocket fours, check folding, ace and hearts, check calling, king jack of clubs, check raising, the gut shot, backdoor flush draw, with enough equity on the turn that we can actually barrel our opponent off of what a lot of his made hands he does call us with. It's important, guys, to be able to play your entire hand range correctly, rather than just the one hand that you have in a vacuum. Yes, your check range on this flop is going to be plus EV. Is it the most plus EV line for your hand? I would argue no, because you're going to have a lot of implied odds when you do hit your hand. Is it going to be the most plus EV for your entire hand range? If you add up all of your hands, the EV of every single hand that you've played, okay, and by check raising this hand, you take away the profitability of check raising another hand, say king jack of clubs, and therefore you're reducing the overall EV of your play because of if you're turning this hand to a check raise. So think about that, and think about then why we should be check raising this flop. Zane, you make a good call. Full pot, Zane, you should now be folding. Okay, now here's the reason why Zane, you should be folding. If he was bluffing you on the flop, he now just got there. So therefore, queen jack offsuit with queen of hearts. Yeah, you're thinking to yourself, oh, I have the queen high flush draw, but you're not getting the pot odds to call with the queen high flush draw here. You need roughly 4-1, and if you're already assuming your opponent has the flush, there's not really any bluffs your opponent can have right now, other than air that hasn't just got there right now at this point. So I think Zane, he gives you an out by overplaying his hand here. You should just as easily be folding on this turn rather than calling it off and or shoving it all in and then stacking off that way. So, okay, guys, this has been the end of part 1 of the GCS Week 2. It's been CodeRed Rules. See you guys in a little bit. Good luck at the tables.